I am vengeance. I am the night. I am hardcore game developer.
Hi guys, today I'll be reviewing Marvel's Spider-Man. This game is a recently released PS4 exclusive. To review this game, I'm going to compare its gameplay to Batman Arkham Knight, as they are quite comparable. What I'm going to compare are their three main components: movement, combat and stealth. And after this comparison, I'm going to compare this Spider-Man game to my favourite Spider-Man game of all time. Before I start the comparison, I'd briefly like to mention that Spider-Man offered a great story, along with a wide variety of side quests and collectibles. And it also had puzzles and fun dialogue during the web swinging process to break up the gameplay nicely. Okay, first off I'm going to start comparing Spider-Man with Arkham Knight's movement. Okay, firstly in Spider-Man, the web swinging was solid for the majority of the game, as swinging from webs was fast and satisfying. It was easy to learn but difficult to master, and when you lost momentum or were unable to web swing, Spider-Man had a wide variety of moves to compensate, such as pin launching, web zipping, wall running, wall launching, ground bouncing and diving. And besides getting from point A to B, web slinging played a big part in this game. There were lots of chasing sequences, such as car chases, boss chases, drone chases, and even pigeon chases. And I especially like the drone chases because in order to get 3 stars you had to fly through all the hoops with precision, and you had to do it in a really good time. Though the movement in Spider-Man was really well done, I do have a few criticisms. Such as when I was running indoors, I would occasionally get stuck running up a wall constantly instead of manoeuvring through a tight passage such as a doorway. And during the web slinging challenges, sometimes a small part of Spider-Man's body would occasionally clip a wall, causing Spider-Man to completely lose momentum and almost become stuck to the wall. I don't mind losing momentum completely, that's a good punishment, but once you became stuck to the wall, you would have to press the joystick in the opposite direction and wait for about a second to become loose and able to swing again. The last problem I had was travelling small distances. For example, when I was collecting backpacks in the game, I would constantly zip past them before deciding to slowly crawl to them. In most games these aren't big problems, but in Spider-Man, when you're constantly moving fast and feeling good about it, these little problems can become a bit of a nuisance. The game also didn't force you to learn how to web swing properly in order to beat it. I bet the game 100%, including the drone challenges, before I realised that you weren't supposed to let go of the trigger while web swinging. It did briefly explain how to do this with some text at the start of the game, but it shouldn't have allowed me to pass the tutorial without me consistently being able to web swing properly. I also learned a new trick after beating the game, which I call the quick stop, and basically it's done by pressing the circle button in mid-air without holding the joystick in any direction, and it allowed you to come to a complete stop in mid-air, which I would have found useful for traversing those small distances I complained about earlier. Just testing one thing, if you want to stop, you just press circle. Now I know how to traverse small distances. So how does the movement compare to Arkham? Well, though Batman wasn't as fast as Spider-Man, I still found Arkham's ways of travelling quite solid. Batman's gliding was well utilised throughout the whole series, as perfecting it was required for some challenges, and you also needed good glide control to access a lot of Riddler trophies. Batman also had access to the Batmobile in the latest game, which allowed him to travel a lot faster. Though Batman had solid methods of transport, travelling with Spider-Man was the winner for me, as Spider-Man was much faster and had a wider array of moves to travel. And I found myself frequently using most of the web techniques to maintain my momentum while travelling. Next I'm going to move on to the combat in Spider-Man. Overall, it was well done. There were a wide variety of moves Spider-Man could use to take down his enemies. Spider-Man naturally flowed from ground-based combat to aerial combat while using his web-based gadgets in the midst. Another feature that enhanced the combat was the focus meter. This meter presented you with a choice. You could either instantly take down an enemy or partially heal. This seems like it would always be an easy choice, but sometimes when I was on low health, I found it better to quickly take out the more harmful enemies and keep my combo going so I could quickly recharge the focus bar again and maintain momentum, as a higher combo meant more damage and recharging the focus meter quicker. The last thing that made combat good was the variety of enemies. There were enemies that were web resistant, enemies with shields, guns, melee weapons, and big enemies, just to name a few. The enemies mixed things up well because it made you think of which enemies to take out first, and it made you use different moves to take out different enemies. For example, you had to dodge behind shielded enemies, you had to uppercut enemies with melee weapons to damage them, and you could only damage the bigger enemies after webbing them. The dodge button was also a good addition to the game. Dodging wasn't just a way to avoid damage, it was a way to reposition yourself or get behind enemies and then open them up to damage. Now to talk about the problems I found with the combat. Though it was great overall, the combat in this game did lack a bit of polish, which was required to turn a good game into a great game. Firstly, although I enjoyed the dodging mechanics, the spider sense was incorporated in a way which hindered the game, as in combat you were often surrounded by enemies shooting you from all directions, making the spider sense a necessity. This was a hindrance because the game was already too easy on the hardest difficulty, and removing the spider sense on a Game Plus mode wouldn't be possible. The only way that I can think of to fix this problem would be to only allow Spider-Man's spider sense to be triggered by gunfire. Another mechanic in the game that could have been smoother was transitioning from enemy to enemy. I often found myself facing an enemy and punching thin air because it was too far away from me, and the enemy wasn't even that far away from me, probably like a meter or two. The only way to combat this problem in the game is to always press triangle to web directly to an enemy, but this often would hinder the nice flow of the combat. I also found the game to be quite beatable with little upgrading necessary. The only upgrades which significantly impacted the game was upgrading the gadgets and allowing 2 takedowns from 1 focus bar, and even those upgrades weren't necessary. And lastly, the satisfaction of the combat could have been improved by including more combat only challenges and making them require more technical skill to 3-star them. The current combat challenges mainly required taking down a handful of enemies as quick as possible to score big, making avoiding damage and combos less important. There were other combat orientated side quests such as demon warehouses, but they didn't keep track of your score. And before I compare the combat to Arkham's combat, I'd like to briefly mention the boss fights in Spider-Man. And the boss fights in Spider-Man at first were quite fun, but the spider sense made each boss fight feel similar to the last, as all you had to do was dodge them when your spider sense flashed. The developers tried to fix this problem by surrounding some bosses with henchmen and giving the boss a ground-based attack that you would have to jump over instead of dodge when the spider sense lit up. This made some bosses a little harder until I discovered you could just web swing and spam the dodge button while in the air to simultaneously avoid ground-based attacks and projectiles. The developers added a couple of simultaneous boss fights towards the end of the game, which did make things a bit more fun again. The Rhino Scorpion fight was definitely fun and didn't feel like the previous boss fights. It required some thought in order to figure out how to beat them, and hitting Rhino required both placement and timing. And nothing is more satisfying to me in a Spider-Man game than outsmarting Rhino. The other simultaneous boss fight was Electro and Vulture, and that was a pretty good boss fight as well, because it was a completely aerial boss fight, which was another nice change up. Now to compare the combat to the Arkham series. So the combat in the Arkham series was done masterfully. Like in Spider-Man, a higher combo meter was advantageous. The combos in Arkham stopped once you made a false move, such as missing with an attack or using the wrong attack on the wrong enemy, along with more conventional methods such as getting hit or not making your next move quick enough. While in Spider-Man, you could only lose your combo by getting hit or not making a move quick enough. And not making a move quick enough in Spider-Man was like not making a move for 20 seconds. So the criteria for a combo was a lot stricter in the Arkham series, which I preferred. Arkham also utilised combos to their fullest. Not only did a higher combo meter increase your points multiplier, but it also gave you access to instant takedowns and allowed you to attack faster and do a lot more damage. This made the big combos much more satisfying, but the increased speed also made them harder to maintain, which further boosted the satisfaction of combos. Like in Spider-Man, the enemies themselves were well done, as there was a good variety of enemies, with variations like shielded enemies, enemies with blades, electrified enemies, just to name a few. All of these enemies required different skills and moves to beat. They also had to be dodged in different ways. This ties in with the combo system perfectly, as throwing in different variations of the more advanced enemies during a combat challenge is an ideal way to break the rhythm and make you play the combat challenges over and over until you perfect them. Even the most basic enemies could throw you off, especially when they tackled you in Game Plus mode. Speaking of the combat challenges, they were also done soundly. There were a variety of different challenges, such as seeing how many enemies you can take down before getting hit, to teaming up with Nightwing and taking down enemies. What really made the challenges great were the combos, as they impacted the score, and I would often find myself replaying these challenges until I completed them in a single combo, so that I could score big on the leaderboard and beat my friends. So in combat, Batman is the clear winner. Its combat system is integrated much better, its challenges have a much better scoring system. The length of its challenges range from medium length to endless length, as opposed to Spider-Man's only long combat challenges not involving a scoring system. Batman also fluently moves from enemy to enemy while attacking, while in Spider-Man you often need to press the triangle button to web zip to an opponent first. Spider-Man has a lot of great concepts in combat, such as the use of his gadgets and his aerial combat, but in order for Spider-Man to compete, it needs polish. Having a great set of moves and having them flow well together are two different things. Also, Spider-Man needs a game mode without a spider sense for it to compete. Moving on to stealth. The stealth scenes in Spider-Man were initially a lot of fun, as Spider-Man's abilities allowed you to take down enemy after enemy in quick succession. Though the stealth scenes were fun, they lacked depth. Firstly, there wasn't a wide variety of enemies, so they could all be taken out in the same way. Secondly, the environment didn't impact the stealth much. Occasionally there were shelves which you could yank onto enemies or vents to stealth them from, but the majority of the time you were performing perch takedowns or simply pressing triangle to zip to an enemy and knock them out.
No talking during the
The
infiltration.
spider sense also lessened the importance of most stealth sequences, as it allowed you to dodge anything in the game with relative ease, including bullets. Being able to sense bullets and dodge bullets are two different things. The game shouldn't have allowed you to be able to consistently dodge gunfire from high caliber weapons in the game. This allows you to beat the stealth sequences by resorting to combat out in the open. This basically made the stealth scenes skippable, which greatly lessened their importance. They really should have added guns with undodgeable bullets. Also, once you were discovered by an enemy, you had to wait behind a building for about a minute before the enemies lost your location and allowed you to stealth them again. There were a small handful of stealth sequences where discovery meant starting again, but there weren't enough of these challenges, and beating them fast was the only way to get 3 stars. Arkham Knight had a much better star system. You got each star based on how you took out enemies. For example, take out the guy with the rocket launcher last, or perform 3 vent takedowns. It also listed the best time for each challenge. The Arkham Star model, along with the tougher enemies, would have given the game much more replay value and would have made the stealth sequences much more satisfying. It would have forced you to plan more and explore the environment in a lot more depth in order to beat a stealth theme, yet alone 3-star it. Having the time separately would also allow you to go back to a level and focus on beating it as quickly as possible with your own unique method, rather than the methods used to 3-star it. Before I go on to Arkham, I'd like to also mention that there were some other stealth sequences which involved playing as Miles Morales and MJ instead of Spider-Man. And in these stealth sequences you had to sneak past enemies to get to a desired location. These stealth sequences actually did require stealth, but they were a bit linear for my liking. There was only one path to take in each sequence, which was pointed out by the compass. It also made disrupting and sneaking past enemies way too easy. There were even occurrences where I didn't cause a distraction and I just carefully ran past the guards after getting half spotted. There were good ideas in these stealth sequences, such as hacking devices to cause distractions, calling Spider-Man to take down lone enemies, and using a taser to stealthily take down enemies late game. but these concepts didn't go far enough to impact the game. The developers also only included MJ and Miles Morales stealth sequences in the story and not challenges. Had they expanded on these stealth sequences and included them in well thought out challenges, it would have added a lot of solid gameplay. So in Arkham, the stealth was done a lot better, as it presented with a plethora of ways to take down your enemies, such as vent takedowns, grate takedowns, wall takedowns, inverted takedowns, just to name a few. It also presented with a wide variety of enemies to mix things up, like enemies invisible to detective mode, turrets and drones. The enemies also adapted to you, such as when they discovered you had taken one of them out from on top of a gargoyle, they would plant a mine on it. Also, the enemies in Arkham were a lot tougher in stealth, and this forced you to explore the environment thoroughly before being able to complete a stealth challenge. And when you got discovered by an enemy, it made you run and hide until you could enter stealth again, because being discovered by enemies in Arkham meant getting massacred by gunfire, and Batman doesn't have an amazing spider sense, or the ability to dodge anything. All of this combined with good level design allowed Arkham Knight to offer a much more in-depth stealth experience. Before I conclude this video, I thought I should mention the upgrading system in Spider-Man, as this is a Spider-Man game review. Firstly, each time you leveled up, Spider-Man would get a buff, such as increased health, damage or speed, along with a skill point. Your skill points could then be used to unlock or improve an ability from 3 upgrade trees: Innovator, Defender or Web Slinger, with the Web Slinger abilities boosting your aerial combat and web swinging. The Defender abilities improved your power in close combat and rewarded you when you had a higher combo count or did perfect dodges. And lastly, the Innovator skill tree gave you a combination of moves and boosts that helped you in both stealth and close combat. Spider-Man also gained tokens from different side quests. These tokens could then be used to upgrade your gadgets, buy new suits, and unlock new suit modifications. Each suit came with a unique ability, such as increasing your focus bar generation rate, or giving Spider-Man a speed boost. These abilities took time to charge and lasted for a limited time. The suit modifications could be equipped to any suit and gave you buffs such as faster focus generation or reduced melee damage. The token upgrade system made all the side quests matter, as you needed to beat the side quests in order to get them, and the suit buffs allowed you to equip Spider-Man with abilities to suit your own unique playstyle. I personally focused on a playstyle that allowed me to generate focus as quick as possible, so I could quickly take down enemies or heal when I needed to. The ability tree combined with the gadget upgrade system was a good concept, which would have complemented the game really well had it been more difficult. And now to conclude the video, overall Batman was the better game by a significant margin, as its levels and challenges were much more solidly designed, but this doesn't make Spider-Man a bad game. Spider-Man's best feature was its controls. Firstly, Spider-Man had a diverse moveset, which allowed him to transition between stealth, combat, and web swinging seamlessly. Also, changing between web-based aerial and close combat felt natural. It felt like you were doing it as Spider-Man. Whether it was fighting enemies or just web swinging, you moved in a way that felt true to Spider-Man's nature. This is likely going to be the first Spider-Man game in the series, and now that the developers have a solid game engine, I'm excited for the games to follow, as the developers will have more time to focus their efforts on the gameplay rather than the game engine. Hopefully they focus on optimizing the stealth in the next game. Also, allowing Spider-Man to web glide would also be an awesome addition. Anyway, that concludes my video. I'll compare this Spider-Man game to my favourite Spider-Man game of all time in my next video. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed my video and enjoy the remainder of my 198 hit combo.
Bad news! More Sable guys! Good news? There is no good news!
Spider-Man, that Sable unit's gone rogue before. Sable International's got their hands too full to do anything about it, but they don't care if we do.
I was gonna take him down anyway, but this makes it more fun. Thanks. guys just won't stop. Tell Silver Sable I said I'm not interested, and this is really getting stalkerish.